Hi, this is Eric Morris Eskenazi. I'm the host of the Iraq Dispatches podcast. Thanks for tuning into this latest episode, which marks the beginning of the fourth season for Iraq Dispatches podcast. I have the utmost pleasure of interviewing David Bossert, who's had a really amazing, prolific career. He started working at Walt Disney Animation Studios back in the 80s. He ended up contributing his skills to such classics as Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Little Mermaid, The Lion King, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, Nightmare Before Christmas. The list goes on and on. He's also a very prolific writer. He's written books, a lot of it dealing with different aspects of Disney's history. The latest one is called Claude Coats, Walt Disney's Imagineer, The Making of Disneyland. He also wrote a book about Kem Weber. Kem Weber, mid-century furniture designs for the Disney Studios, and he also wrote a book called Dali and Disney Destino, which was a collaboration between Salvador Dali and Walt Disney. The book. It covers the story, artwork, and friendship behind the legendary film. So I hope all of you enjoy this interview with David Bossert. Enjoy. All right, take care. Hello, thanks for listening to the Erratic Dispatches podcast. We'll be back shortly after a brief break. Hello, I've been using Anchor.fm now for about almost a year for the podcast Erratic Dispatches, which is distributed through Anchor.fm. It's completely free to use, very easy, and any audio that you upload or record through the website, it will be you can use it to organize your audio files, and once your podcasts are ready to submit, it will be available to stream within at least 8 different streaming sites. Okay, so Dave, do you mind telling the audience about like how you first started getting into animation? I know that you're originally from Astoria, New York.
Well, I was born in Astoria, Queens. I grew up out on Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was pursuing art classes in high school. And ultimately, when I graduated high school, I went into an advertising art program at the State University of New York at Farmingdale. And from there, transferred out to Cal Arts in Valencia, California, where I was enrolled in a character animation program at Cal Arts. And that school essentially was set up by Walt Disney. It was a creation that came out of his relationship with the Chouinard Art Institute, Mrs. Chouinard, and also the LA Music Conservancy. And so they kind of merged those two groups together and created California Institute of the Arts. And so I was in the character animation program. And from there, when I graduated, I started working initially on some early video games called Space Ace and Dragon's Lair. And I did that for about, I don't know, I think it was 9 or 10 months after graduating, and they went bankrupt, that studio, and I wound up getting hired right away by Disney because they were in production on a film called The Black Cauldron. And the studio was in a bit of turmoil with outside financiers trying to take it over and break it up, sell off the parts. And there was a management change out that happened during that film. And I frankly thought it was going to be my first and last animated feature film. And I was going to head back to New York and get into doing commercials and, advertising. And, I wound up being kept on, and I kept thinking for the next couple of pictures at Disney that I was going to be laid off at the end of the project, and then I would head back to New York and do commercials. And I think after about the 4th or 5th picture I worked on at Disney, I realized that I was going to probably stick around for a while. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Would you mind talking a little bit about Dragon's Lair? I remember that game. I remember it being very cutting edge at the time. Wasn't it on a laser disc?
Yeah. So Dragon's Lair and Space Ace really were these early video games that were in arcades, and they were played off of you played it like a regular arcade video machine where you had a joystick and a couple of buttons that you pushed, and the sort of underlying technology was a laser disc, and you were making decisions as you were going through the game, and using the buttons and the joystick. And if you went one way, it took you down a different path story wise. If you went another way, it took you a different path. So it was done in full animation, which was really, I think, it was beautiful looking.
And like when you first started working in Disney back in the 80s, what was it like? Was it like the room that you worked in? Was it like a large room? Or was it small little offices? What was the environment like?
Well, the interesting thing was I was in the animation studio, the main building on the Walt Disney Studio lot in Burbank, California, and that facility was built in 1939, and essentially was created off the success of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And so it was set up in an interesting way, because if you can imagine looking down on two H's that are connected by the center crossbar, and so each one of the legs of the H was a wing, and had a corridor down the center, and then the offices all had windows, which was a luxury, I think, but a necessity for artists. And so it was really a kind of a wonderful mid-century modern facility. And I was working in an office with another artist. So there was typically, two artists to an office, unless you were a senior artist, a senior animator, you had your own office. I have to say, I mean, it was really kind of a wonderful experience. I mean, I was working on a desk that was designed by Kem Weber, who designed the studio back in the late 30s. And this furniture that he designed was designed specifically for the different disciplines within the animation process. So the furniture itself was very functional, and was designed with the input of the artists at the studio. So that furniture was still being used and I obviously was starting at a low level. I was an in-betweener, which is just sort of an entry level position within animation. And and here I was sitting at a piece of furniture that really literally had a soul to it. I think it was decades old. It was countless artists had worked on it, and by the way, I'm speaking to you, I'm sitting at a 1939 Kem Weber animation desk that the studio gave me when I left, which was, and I've been working on this particular desk for nearly 4 decades.
Wow. And then like what were like, when you first started out working at Disney, were like the hours like really long? Were you required to do like a lot of overtime? Were you working on weekends, depending on the project or the feature that you're working on at the time?
Well, a couple of things there. To work in animation, you have to be part of the Screen Cartoonist Guild. So you were part of a union essentially, and there were set hours. You did your 8 hours, and anything above that was overtime. And I have to say, the first week, the first day that I started working at the studio in early 1984, I did overtime. I was asked to work overtime, and that week I wound up working Saturday. So I did a 6-day work week, and I did that for like 4 or 5 months, and then I wound up working 7 days a week for quite a number of months after that. And you're getting paid overtime, which is time and a half, and then when you're coming in, you're getting double time on the weekends, and if you work on a holiday weekend, it's golden time, which is triple time, and it's all kinds of things. But I was working so much that all I kept doing was essentially going home, going to sleep, getting up in the morning, driving to the studio, working a 10 or 12-hour day, and then going home and going to sleep and repeating that. And so I really saved a lot of money up in anticipation of being laid off and going back to New York to do commercials. So.
And do you mind talking about some of your experiences working on the features at Disney during the 80s, 90s?
Yeah, I think that, when you look at the animation industry, it goes through cycles. And when I got hired at Disney on the Black Cauldron, I think animation was in a trough, if you will. It was sort of at the bottom of the valley. And several years prior to when I got hired, there was an animation strike in Los Angeles. A lot of the television animation work wound up going overseas to Asian studios in various countries like Korea and Philippines and Japan. And so as far as feature animation was concerned, Disney really was kind of the only game in town. And so during my time on the Black Cauldron at the studio, there was a management change out. Michael Eisner, Frank Wells came into the studio. They brought in people like Jeffrey Katzenberg and other executives that had worked in the industry at Paramount and other studios. And there was sort of this rebirth going on because of Roy E. Disney, who was Walt Disney's nephew and son of Walt's brother, Roy O., and business partner. And so, the company went through this dormant phase almost from the time that Walt Disney had passed away in 1966 to about 1984, 85, when this management changeover happened. And so, it turned into the late 80s and into the 90s was really this very much high growth period for the Disney company.
And was like working at Disney back then when you were a young man, was it a very open environment, or was it very competitive with the other animators there?
Well, I think that anytime you get hundreds of artists together, there's always going to be, well, first and foremost, as an artist, you have a slightly outsized ego. You have to, some people manage their ego better than others. And you also are striving to do the best possible work that you can do. And you have to have a skill set that is going to allow you to adapt and change, and also stay at a level of quality and craftsmanship that is equal to or better than the other artists you're working with. And from my standpoint, it's hugely important for all of these artists to work together, and they do generally. I mean, there's always some rivalries and there's always grousing, about this person or that person. But for the most part, there's a lot of camaraderie within the industry, and there's a lot of people helping one another climb the ladder.
And then when you work on the different features at Disney, how many months were you working per feature? Were you sometimes simultaneously working on three different features at once with the animation?
Not necessarily. I think later in the 90s, when they had multiple pictures going, you could be working on one picture one week and jumping over and helping out to get another picture finished. But in the mid to late 80s, you were going from one picture to the next, and I think part of the the magic, and I don't I kind of laugh when I use that word because it's so ingrained in the company from a branding standpoint, but part of the magic of making a film like a Disney animated feature is that you have this group of artists that are together and it becomes this well-oiled machine over a series of pictures. If you look at the early history of the Walt Disney Company and Walt Disney Animation, you had Walt's 9 old men, his top 9 animators, and those guys worked together for decades. They did short cartoons in the 30s, then they did Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Pinocchio and Fantasia and Bambi, and they went from one picture to the next. And some of those guys, there were a few that didn't work on one picture because they were starting to work on another picture and so on. But for the most part, you have this well-oiled machine of artists. And that's really what I think is part of the uniqueness of Disney animation, at least early on. You had this this beautiful dimensional house style that felt cohesive and uniformed and beautifully executed. And I think that's part of the issue you're seeing today with a lot of different studios opening, having animation departments and cranking out animated features. If you look at the features that are coming out today, there's sort of a blurring of the house styles. They're all starting to look similar, and it becomes difficult for the average person to distinguish between a Disney animated film and Pixar or Netflix or Warner Brothers or any of the other studios out there.
And then when you're working on the different features at Disney, were you ever allowed, like, did you ever come in and like watch like dailies of like just like the rough cuts of like different animation sequences?
Sure. Absolutely. I think, as I moved up the ladder from an in-betweener to an assistant to, an animator, a supervising animator, a visual effects supervisor, creative director, all those different roles, you're getting more into the filmmaking team, if you will. You're part of that core group. So yes, you are going to dailies. You are seeing the stuff as it's being created. You are commenting on it. You are looking at it in continuity, which is important. As far as the film is being constructed.
And what kind of work did you do on Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
So on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I was an effects animator. So I helped create elements that integrated the characters into the live action plates. So everything from, creating tone mats and shadows and highlights, sparkles on Jessica's dress, reflections in automobiles, things that you might not as a viewer see right away. But if it wasn't there, you'd feel like something was missing. I like to say with special effects work, there's a lot of it that isn't consciously seen, it's felt. And when you're integrating an animated character into a live action world, there's a lot of things you need to do to that character to make the character anchored into that live action plate, and make it believable. And if you shortchange that, people will feel like something was missing. They might not be able to tell you, they might not be able to articulate to you exactly what that was, but they will certainly feel like something was off or didn't fit properly. And the flip side of it is when they are completely drawn in and the characters feel like they are in the scene with the live actors, it becomes believable to them, and it helps draw them into the story that much more.
And were there any particular mentors of yours in your beginnings in your career in animation?
Yeah, absolutely. There was one senior animator named Ted Kiersey who I consider not only a mentor, but he's become a good friend. And later in my career, as I became a visual effects supervisor, I actually had Ted working for me, although I never viewed it that way. You know, he was part of my crew, he was part of my team, and I was sort of the team captain. But he was an exceptional and is an exceptional artist, and somebody who I had a lot of respect for. And you know, he was a sort of a gentle soul who was really well versed in doing hand drawn visual effects,
Mhm.
and he learned it from some of the, you know, the previous generation of people, the folks that the guys that worked on Pinocchio and Fantasia and films like that.
I was taking a look at some of the articles on your website, and would you mind talking a little bit about your experience working on The Nightmare Before Christmas?
Yeah, you know, The Nightmare Before Christmas, I had a very small role on. It was the film was done by an incredibly talented group of stop motion animators up in San Francisco in the Bay Area. That's where the film was made, and it was obviously, you know, Tim Burton's vision. You know, he had done his take on a poem that he wrote about the night before Christmas, and he kind of slammed together two holidays that he, you know, were particularly near and dear to him, Halloween and Christmas. And so uh, in that film, it snows in Halloween Town. And so I was asked to come on and do some computer generated snow, some particle system generated snow for Halloween Town. And it was something that helped them out in production. And, you know, again, this was this was 1992, 1993, and it was the infancy of computer generated animation. I mean, it doesn't seem that long ago, but you know, it's almost 30 years ago. And I was working with a software engineer named Trin Huang, and he was writing the code as we were doing the scenes in order for the snow to behave the way we wanted the snow to behave, to make Tim happy, and make the director happy. And you know, it was a small contribution to a film that I think really had a big impact as far as stop motion animation goes, and the rebirth of it to some degree on a grander scale. You know, now you have Leica Studios up in Portland doing lots of stop motion films that are just spectacular.
And like, have you learned yourself the different computer animation software?
Yes. So, you know, I actually got involved with doing some computer animation very early on in its development. I spent a couple weeks at Alias Wavefront offices in Santa Barbara at the time before they were gobbled up by another big company. And, you know, I have to say, as I moved up into a supervisory role, I made it a point to do some hands-on work on some of the software platforms that were being developed and used, Maya and Houdini, and you know, some of the various other Power Animator, which was the precursor to Maya. I made it a point to actually do some work on those software packages and generate some animation, more because I wanted to have a deeper understanding of how it worked and how to get work out of it. And that made me able to communicate with the CG animators that were working on projects that I was supervising.
And I know you've had a very prolific career working in television and working on different like commercials. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Sure. You know, all through my early career, and a lot of artists do this and still do this today. I was constantly being asked if I could, do some freelance work on commercials. And, the studio never had a problem with it. They didn't want their artists working on competitive feature projects. But at the time in the late 80s and throughout the 90s, there was tons of commercials being done in Los Angeles. And I ultimately finally got to do commercials that I had been thinking about doing, as a career early on when I first got out of Cal Arts. So in the 90s, I wound up doing hundreds of commercials, everything from Tony the Tiger and Fruit Loops and the Rice Krispie characters, the 7-Up dots, the Keebler elves, the list just goes on and on. And I worked on literally hundreds of those commercials throughout the 90s and into the early 2000s. And for me, it wasn't just a source of additional income. It was also honing your skills, doing different things. Many of those commercials were animation and live action combinations. Some of them were even employing stop motion, live action, and animation techniques. So it was great to keep your finger in the pie, so to speak, outside of the Disney studios, outside the berm, as we used to refer to it.
And
because I think I was just going to say, I was going to add on to that. It's very easy when you have a long, I was at the Walt Disney Animation Studios for over 32 years. So it's very easy to disappear in that studio and not be known for anything outside the studio, other than that you're working on these films. And so for me, being able to do freelance on commercials and some television shows and specials and things like that afforded me the opportunity to meet a lot of other people outside of Disney animation that were in the animation industry.
Did you ever work on any projects outside the US, international projects?
Yeah, I did Who Framed Roger Rabbit over in London, and that was such a great experience because the animation crew that was assembled was really a very international crew. There were artists from all over the world that came to London to work on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and so that was especially gratifying because I made friends in so many different countries around the world that I still have friendships with today. And after I finished Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I wound up going back over to London for I think it was like a 3-week or a month stint to work on a series of Burger King commercials. And I had worked over in Ireland prior to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I worked on the first Land Before Time. I think there's like 15 sequels to it right now, but I worked on the original Land Before Time with Don Bluth. And so, I think it was a great experience just to be able to leave the country, go work in a couple of foreign countries, and work with some incredibly talented artists from all over the world.
Hello, thanks for listening to the Erratic Dispatches podcast. We'll be back shortly after a brief break. Do you mind discussing a little bit about, I know that you were awarded, with several other colleagues, a U.S. patent for it was a software to convert 3D images on iPad apps. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. That was an interesting project because, again, you're not setting out to get an award or to receive a patent for something. That isn't the objective. The objective for me was to come up with something new and sort of an immersive experience, if you will. And I was heading up the special projects group at Walt Disney Animation Studios at the time. And our partners over in consumer products were doing an app of Beauty and the Beast. And right around that time, the studio was converting the original Beauty and the Beast that was done in 1991, which I had worked on, that had been converted into a 3D experience for theaters. And so I have this project in my department to do something with an enhanced ebook, if you will, for the iPad on Beauty and the Beast. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be interesting if we could utilize the left and right eye images for the 3D film and use some of those assets within the iPad, but be able to blend between the left and right eye image using the gyroscope of the iPad. That was sort of the concept I had. And I went and I talked to some of our software engineers, and a couple of them were like, yeah, we could probably do this. And there had been already some software that had done some portion of what I was trying to do, but it didn't do the whole thing. And so they wound up writing some code, and we were able to put this on an iPad. And when you move the iPad back and forth, you kind of blend it between the left and right eye, and you got this faux, I kind of called it, everybody sort of coined it like a 2.5D, because you were getting some parallax. So you could kind of see a shifting of the perspective when you moved your iPad back and forth. And it was just kind of an interesting thing. And you didn't have to wear glasses to experience it. It was right there on the iPad. So, and it was kind of funny. We were able to get that done. And I have to say, it must have been 6 or 8 or 10 months later, one of the engineers came into my office and said, hey, they want to submit that for a patent. And I was like, wow, that's cool. Great. And so they did. And I think it was like 1.5 years, 2 years later that there was a patent issued, and my name is on the patent along with a couple of the other software engineers. And then another year or two went by, and another patent was issued based on that original patent. So there was another aspect of it that they were able to patent, and I my name's on that patent. And you have to, sometimes you have to laugh at these things, because I mean, you do the project and you move on to the next thing, and you're not thinking about U.S. patents or any of that. Somebody else is, obviously, and it comes back, and you get something like that, which is it's a great honor. But it was also a team effort, and I really have to give a lot of credit to the software engineers. I mean, they did most of the heavy lifting. I just had the idea. I went to them with an idea and explained an idea to them, and they were able to take my idea and create the zeros and ones in the software code to make that happen.
And is like this technology being used a lot now, like in like different iPad video games?
Honestly, I couldn't tell you where it's being used or what they're doing. I left the studio in 2016, and I've been writing full time, so I really haven't kept up on that kind of stuff. But these are the types of things where patents get issued, stuff is used, and it may go dormant. It may be used prolifically. It may be something that they continue to build upon to do other things.
And I watched like all of your like documented episodes on your YouTube channel. They're like really great, interesting. And do you mind talking about how you first started becoming an author?
Yeah, sure. It's really an interesting story, because I have to give, I always give Don Hahn, producer of Beauty and the Beast and Lion King, and he's a documentary director and everything. I always have to give him credit for this, because we were sitting in a lounge called the Ruby Bar and Grill. I guess it was the Ruby Lounge at a boutique hotel in Boston. And I guess this had to have been in 2010. We had met up in Boston because he and I were doing a presentation at the Boston Museum of Fine Art. And I had just come from Barcelona, Spain, where I had done a presentation on this Destino project that I was involved with, and Don flew in from Los Angeles. So we met up in this lounge when we got into Boston, and we were having a drink and we're just chatting. And the presentation that we were doing the next day was on Destino and Fantasia 2000. And with both of those projects, they were spearheaded, executive produced by Roy E. Disney. And Roy had passed away in December of 2009. And so, anytime you think of Destino or Fantasia 2000, you start to talk about Roy, because he really was the driving force for both of those projects. And Don and I were trading some stories, and I had worked with and traveled with Roy quite a bit. And Don said to me, boy, he goes, you ought to put some of those stories in a book. And that's really sort of where it started, because I started thinking about that, and a couple months went by, and I thought to myself, well, I've never written a book before, so I should look into, could I write a book? And I went to Amazon and I purchased a book on writing a book. And out of that book, I gleaned enough information to write a synopsis of what I thought this book could be about, for remembering Roy, and I wrote a sample chapter. And then I cold called somebody at Disney Publishing, and we met, and they said, wow, we'd love to do this book, and gave me a book contract. And so I wrote that book, and when I turned it in, I gave them a pitch to do the book on Destino, the Dali and Disney film. And they said, yeah, we absolutely want to do this book. And so, they gave me a contract for that. And next thing you know, I've just been writing books full time, and it overlapped nicely with, I wrote several of those books while I was still at Disney. And then when I left Disney, I just continued writing. So it's worked out very nicely. And I've got book projects stacked out to 2026. So I'm just going from one project to the next now.
Do you mind talking about like what you're currently working on in regards to the books?
Well, I just finished working. It just got released. I finished it last year, but I did Claude Coats, Walt Disney's Imagineer, The Making of Disneyland, which is the one and only book on Imagineer Claude Coats, who's a Disney legend, and worked closely with Walt Disney on building Disneyland. And he was the show designer on Pirates of the Caribbean and Adventures Through Inner Space and Alice in Wonderland, and a lot of, he was a co-show designer on the Haunted Mansion, and and then translated a lot of those iconic rides, attractions down to Walt Disney World and other parks. So that was a real it was a major project, and I'm real happy with the way that turned out. That's gone out in the world, and a lot of people are real pleased with it. So lots of good comments. And I'm just finishing a manuscript right now on a book that's titled The Art of George Scribner, the Panama Canal Expansion Paintings. And so he's an artist I worked with at the studio, who had a nearly 10-year commission with the Republic of Panama to document in oil paintings the newly expanded Panama Canal, which opened in 2016. And so I'm doing a book / catalog, if you will, because he's doing all of the paintings are being shown at the National Gallery of Panama in May. And so that's going to be available at the museum, at the gallery, and I'm imagining on Amazon and stuff like that. So, and I've got a number of other book projects that are in the hopper. And, for me, I don't work just on one thing at a time. I usually have multiple projects going on. So I may sit and write in the morning for a few hours. And then in the afternoon, I'm doing research for one project or another, and, gathering material so that when the time comes, I have all my research together and I can sit down and start writing.
When you were doing research for like the Claude Coats book, did you go a lot to like Disneyland, and then did you like look at a lot of like the blueprints of the park, when they were in the planning stages, or what kind of research did you
No,
do?
not so much on that. I actually did a tremendous amount of interviews with former Imagineers and executives that worked with Claude, and also worked closely with the family. And the family, his son in particular, Alan Coates, had a tremendously organized archive of his father's work and career. So I had transcripts of interviews from that Claude had done over the years, as well as all the interviews that I did along with Alan, of some of the folks that had worked closely with Claude and Walt Disney. And so that was, an enormous amount of material to sift through, and then bring it together into a book that people could easily read, and also make sure that there was enough supporting images to go along with it.
When I saw like that behind the scenes video about your book on Dali and Disney, the Destino, do you mind talking a little about that? How it feature, you can actually watch the film. It's like there's like a screen where there's like a play button. You can watch it.
Yeah, again, that was one of those things when I was writing that book, because I was part of the team that had finished Destino. Now Destino was a short film that Salvador Dali had developed at the studio, with Walt Disney and a couple of the artists that Walt had assigned to work with Dali. And it really was going to be a segment for a Fantasia-like film. So Dali worked on it mostly in 1946, a little bit in 1947, and the studio was under a tremendous amount of financial pressure at the time. So Walt kind of shelved the idea, or shelved the project, I should say, and they focused on getting Alice in Wonderland completed and then Cinderella completed by the end of the 40s. Cinderella released in 1950, and that actually helped to get the studio back on its feet financially, because during World War II, the studio had lost like 30%, 35% of their revenue coming out of theaters in Europe. So Walt had shifted to doing a lot of government contract work, training films, those types of things during World War II. And so after World War II, his distributor didn't really want more package pictures, which are like Make Mine Music or Fantasia. Those are considered package pictures, which are essentially feature films that are made up of short segments, short standalone segments. It's understandable why he shelved the project. I think also there was probably a sense that Destino had a very Dali-esque quality to it, that drifted away from the Disney house style. Anyway, the project was shelved, but they remained lifelong friends. Walt in the 50s went over with his wife to visit Dali and his wife in Figueres, Spain, where Dali had a home. And they maintained a friendship and communication, but I think it was in the late 1990s where the seed was planted by Roy E. Disney to actually complete the project. And by the way, one of the artists that Walt had assigned to work with Salvador Dali, a gentleman named John Hench. And in the early 2000s, John Hench was still working at the Disney Studios. So we had one of the original filmmakers. So it made it that much more authentic to complete the project, because we had one of the filmmakers still there who had worked with Dali in 1946 on the project. So when that project was completed, it was a number of years later that I pitched the idea to write this book on the project, and they loved the idea. So while I was writing the book, I really wanted people to see the short film, and I thought to myself, well, the technology exists. Why can't we put the movie, the short? It's it's a 6-minute short. Why can't we put that in a book? And so I built a prototype with a colleague of mine from Imagineering, who is an expert on displays. And we put together this prototype, and I shot a little 1-minute pitch, if you will, on my iPhone. Actually had my assistant film me as I talked to my iPhone, and we created this little 60-second video, and I emailed it to the folks at publishing, and they loved it. They said, we have to do this. And it took about 2 years for that book, that special edition book, to come out, because they had to invent the production process, because in order to put a screen, a battery, play button, a headphone jack, and everything into about a 1/4 inch. It's about a 1/4 inch thick. The whole setup, it's a very flat battery and all that. The spine of the book needed to be a 1/4 inch higher than the stack of paper of the book, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you had to adhere this this thin box, if you will, that's a 1/4 inch thick, that is the same size as the cover of the book, that had to be adhered to the inside cover of the book, and the book still had to be able to close. So there was a number of things that had to be done, because the printer had to print the book with a 1/4 inch higher spine than the paper in the book, which required an insert to be put in for shipping. The books had to then be shipped to an electronics assembly operation that put the screen, battery, and all the electronics together, and put that into the book. So it took a little bit to get all of that in place in order to do it, but it was done. And again, people can see the trailer for it on my website at davidbossert.com, and I'm sure you can put a link to it in your show notes.
Sure. How long is the film itself?
The Destino film is only about 6 minutes.
Oh, okay.
But you get to see the whole film in the book, and I think what was cool about that was, well, it was cool just to have a movie in a book, but you have the book that explains the whole project, shows you all of the storyboards and visual development art, and tells the complete story of the project from 1946 to 2003, when we completed it and got nominated for an Academy Award. And the film itself is sort of a work of art in my mind, and is shown regularly at museums around the world when there's exhibitions on Salvador Dali's art, or Disney, or things like that. And I think it's just kind of a neat thing for people to have on their coffee table, where they could open a book and press a button and they play the movie.
Which one of your books have you published so far that you've gotten the most feedback from?
I think my Kem Weber book that I did on the furniture that Kem Weber designed for the Disney Animation Studios. I wound up getting like half a dozen book awards for that project. which was really nice. So we won a gold medal at the Benjamin Franklin Book Awards. We got a silver medal there as well. And there was a number of other gold medals that the book had won. So I'm super proud of that, because it was a project that some people felt was kind of a niche project. It was very sort of specific, and there was some publishers not interested in it because of that.
And like, is there anybody in like Kem Weber's family that's still doing similar work to what he was doing?
No, he has. I think one of his. I think he has a daughter that I'm not sure if she's still alive. She may still be alive, but I didn't have any contact with her.
Mm-hmm. And like, do you ever do like any like lecturing at universities or at museums about animation and about your career and history and that sort of thing?
Oh, absolutely. I do on a somewhat regular basis, at least prior to the pandemic. Although I have to say, I have done some things last year via Zoom. But prior to the pandemic, I would regularly do things, presentations at museums, talking at university programs and classes, and again, prior to this pandemic starting, I'm a visiting scholar at Carnegie Mellon's Entertainment Technology Center. So I was going out there once a year and spending a week, or sometimes twice a year, and just doing one-on-ones with students, and also sitting in on project pitches and things like that. But yeah, museums, universities, conferences. I just did a thing via Zoom with the Spark Animation Festival in Vancouver a couple of months ago.
And like right now, like, are you like, do you still do animation, or are you kind of retired from that? You're just focusing on the writing?
I still have my finger in the pie, so to speak. I'm at my core, I'm an artist. So, I do sculpture work. I draw. I do a lot of writing now, and I am still involved in animation. Not only just writing about it, but I've got a couple other projects that I've been developing. And hopefully I'll be able to announce something in a couple of months on one of them.
Great. And then if someone listening to this podcast was a teenager or a child, they were interested in getting to animation, what would your advice be to them?
Well, my advice would be that, follow your passion. If you're going to get involved in something, make sure you're passionate about it. Don't be wishy-washy and think you want to do it. If whatever you choose to do in your life, regardless of whether it's animation, make sure you're passionate about it, and that you really want to do that, and you want to make that your life's work. And if you do, then you really have to work at it. It's hard work. It doesn't come easy. I often tell people that if you're really interested in animation, you really have to understand what the animation principles are. You've got to get yourself a book like Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson's Disney Animation, The Illusion of Life. It's like the Bible of animation, regardless of whether you're drawing or doing work on the computer or stop motion. The principles of animation that they discuss in that book apply across whatever techniques you're going to be doing. But you really have to work at it. And, being an artist, you have to be passionate about what you're doing, and you have to work at it. It's a lifelong journey. You're never gonna know it all. There's always something new to learn. There's always something new to explore, new tools that are coming along, and new outlets. But animation today is incredibly exciting because there's so many more opportunities for people to do animation than ever before. I mean, compared to when I got into the business, I mean, when I started, Disney was like the only game in town doing features. And then you had a couple of Saturday morning houses and some commercial boutique studios. Now, there's probably at least a half a dozen, 8 or 10 studios in Los Angeles that are doing feature production. Netflix and Sony and Warner Brothers and Universal's Illuminations, Disney, Pixar, Leica Studios. I mean, there's so many different operations going on right now. And then you've got all of the television animation. You've got all of the gaming is a huge part of the animation world. And then you've got all the special effects houses, because if you go see a movie like Spider-Man No Way Home or any of the Marvel films or superhero films, there's so much animation that's done in those films now. So there's countless ways that you can make a living in this business compared to when I first started.
And with your career in animation and writing, would you find to be the biggest joys and challenges?
Well, for me, my whole career has been an evolution. As you grow artistically, you're discovering and moving into new areas. I did that with my career. I moved up the ladder from an in-betweener to an assistant to an animator to a supervising animator to a visual effects supervisor, creative director, a director, a producer, an executive producer. You're wearing multiple hats, doing different things. And then I moved from doing feature animation into doing special projects. So then I started doing work in theme park productions, outdoor projection shows, stage productions, Broadway, cruise lines, gaming, consumer products. It just goes on and on. And as you tackle those kinds of projects, they spawn interest and inspire you to do other things. And that's what's going on for me right now. I mean, I'm looking at doing different types of book projects. I'm looking at different ways to enhance experiences with books. In 2020, I put out the 3D Disneyland book that's filled with stereoscopic photos of Disneyland from the 1950s and the 1980s. So, I'm always looking to do something different and new and fun and just keep exploring.
Have you worked on any interactive website projects and related to Disney?
I did a little short film for the Disney Cruise Line website. I had I won a BAFTA award for my work on a iPad app called Disney Animated. I don't even think it's available anymore. I think it was sunsetted. They have to sunset these things as the operating systems continue to change. Because the economics aren't there. But the Disney Animated was a really robust iPad app that was pretty cool.
And do you mind sharing any unusual stories amidst your research on the different books you've worked on so far? Any facts that you were just totally shocked to learn about?
Well, I think with every project, every book project I work on, there's always something that you uncover, something that you didn't know, something that you learn, and I think that's one of the exciting things about working on a book, is that you're mining material from archives and interviews and all kinds of things. And you always come across things that are going to surprise you. I think on the Claude Coats book, my most recent book project, I was very surprised to learn that Claude had done a series of paintings for the United States Air Force in Japan, and that was kind of a surprise and something I wasn't aware of. and we were able to locate the three paintings and put them in the book. So there's a lot of fun things that you do stumble upon, and they're sort of those gee whiz moments.
And are there like any like audiobook versions of your titles so far?
No, I haven't done any audio versions, and
Mhm.
and part of the reason for that is that most of my books are supported by a lot of visuals, and so there are ebook versions of the books, but to date I haven't done an audiobook.
Okay. Hello. Thanks for listening to the Erratic Dispatches podcast. We'll be back shortly after a brief break. Thanks again for tuning into this latest episode of the Erratic Dispatches podcast, featuring an interview with my guest, David Bossert, who's an animator, author, Disney historian. He's just a really amazing guy, and I hope all of you enjoyed this interview with him. I will be back soon with a new episode. Also, if you happen to go onto my Anchor FM profile page for Iraq Dispatches, there are contribution buttons there. Also, contribution buttons are available through rackdispatches.brooklyndigitalmediainc.com. There are also different ways you can listen to this podcast, YouTube, Spotify. It's like available pretty much every major platform. So I hope you all enjoy it. And I'll be back soon with a new episode. All right, take care. Bye bye.